Italian and Scottish researchers, mainly from the University of Pisa, conducted advanced high-frequency radar, mapping under Egypt's famous pyramids. They claim to have discovered wells, caverns and shafts that are more than 2,000 feet underground. For more than 4,500 years, the Great Pyramid of Giza has been treated like a closed case, surveyed, measured, cataloged, and confidently explained, or so it seemed. In recent years, a quiet shift has taken place, not driven by myths or spectacle, but by hard science. Advanced scans are revealing empty spaces where solid stone was expected, confirmed again and again by independent instruments. This Great Pyramid Anomaly update is forcing historians to pause. What do you think is still hidden inside the Great Pyramid? And if these new findings really can rewrite history, why are they only being discussed now? So what exactly did modern scanners see that no one saw for thousands of years? The anomaly that changed everything. They found a void, but not just any void. Because when most people hear empty space inside the Great Pyramid, they picture a tiny crack, a forgotten niche, or maybe a small gap between blocks. What scientists reported in 2017 was nothing like that. It was big enough to force a pause even for researchers who are trained to stay calm. A large, hidden space with a cross-section similar to the Grand Gallery and minimum length of about 30 meters. They detected above the Grand Gallery a previously unknown cavity at least 30 meters long, sitting above the Grand Gallery like a secret layer in a building you thought you already had the blueprint for. And the reason this moment mattered so much is simple. This was not a story based on vibes. It was not an ancient mystery. Headline: it was peer-reviewed. Instrument confirmed data. So how do you see through millions of kilograms of stone without drilling, breaking, or touching? The monument you use moons. Here's the friendly version. Moons are tiny particles created when cosmic rays hit Earth's atmosphere. They are constantly raining down on us, harmlessly passing through your body, your roof, your phone, and everything. Stone can stop some of them, but not all. And that's the trick. If you place detectors inside or around a massive structure, you can measure how many muons arrive from different angles. If a path is solid, stone, fewer muons make it through. If there's an open space, more muons slip through. Over time, those counts become a kind of shadow picture, like an X-ray made by the sky. Now here's the part that made the scan pyramid's big void hard to ignore. It wasn't detected once and was waved around like a lucky screenshot. It was observed, then confirmed, then reconfirmed using 3 different muon detection technologies. 3 different techniques of meography were used, each independent of the other, and each was corroborated by in-depth computer simulations and independent analyses. One set of detectors used nuclear emulsion films placed in the Queen's chamber. Another used scintillator hodoscopes also set up in that chamber, and another used gas detectors positioned outside the pyramid. 3 different methods, same conclusion. Something sizable is in there, and what was discovered is important. But what was not discovered is just as important. Scientists did not announce a treasure room. They did not claim a burial. They did not say, "We found the missing chamber." They said, "There is a large void. Its shape and exact purpose are unknown, and its presence proves the internal architecture is not fully documented the way people assumed." That is why this Great Pyramid Anomaly update hits different. It is the moment modern science quietly admitted we don't have the full map. And if the pyramid can hide a space this large in plain stone, silence, it raises uncomfortable questions. Should scientists be allowed to explore these voids physically? If the technology can see inside without damage, do we still need to enter at all? And if an empty space can sit above one of the pyramid's most famous corridors for 4,500 years? The pyramids, they're massive, they're mysterious. They've been standing tall for 4,500 years. And according to a new group of scientists, what else might be tucked into areas nobody thinks to question? Because here's the real tension. If the big void proved the pyramid wasn't fully mapped, what did scientists find next? The North A's corridor geometry, not guesswork. a corridor-shaped space, hidden behind the pyramid's north face. And I know that sounds like a tiny detail, like the kind of thing you'd shrug at and scroll past, but this one matters because it does not behave like damage. It does not behave like settling. It does not behave like a random gap between stones that time, accidentally left behind. It behaves like a decision after the big void. Scientists had a new mindset. They stopped asking, is the pyramid fully mapped, and started asking, what else is hiding in places we assumed were boring? So they aimed their attention at the north face near the area with those chevron-shaped blocks above the original entrance, which already looks like the pyramid is wearing a stone necklace. Moon scans picked up something different there, not a blob, not a fuzzy patch. A corridor-shaped structure with ice. Clear geometry sits behind that chevron zone on the north face. A precise analysis, a real characterization of the north face. Corridor. That phrase is important, so let it land. Corridor-shaped, in other words. It is not a void somewhere. It is a space that looks like it was built to be. A space. The 2023 research described it as at least 5 meters long, and the way it showed up in the muon data was the part that made scientists take it seriously. When moons pass through solid limestone, you get one kind of pattern. When they pass through an open space, you get another. This corridor signature was consistent enough that the team could talk about its position and shape with a level of confidence that goes way beyond we think there's something. It was geometry, not guesswork. Now here's where it gets even more interesting. One tool finding one anomaly is exciting. 2 tools finding the same anomaly start to feel like receipts. But when multiple instruments using totally different physics agree that something is there, that's when the conversation changes. Because after muon's other non-destructive techniques were used to confirm the north face corridor too, and not in a vague hand-wavy way. The 2025 work focused on combining different kinds of scans using image fusion, basically lining up the different views so the overlap tells a clearer story. Another 2025 study used electrical resistivity tomography, which is a fancy way of saying they measured how electricity moves through the stone. Solid stone, gaps and different materials conduct differently so it can help outline what's hiding behind a surface. So step by step you get this layered confirmation. Muons flag the corridor-shaped space, then other methods back it up independently. That's why this isn't a crack, a flaw, or a weird shadow. It's a corridor-shaped geometry that keeps reappearing, number matter which measurement system you use. And the details are what make it feel strange. Reports describe it as having a distinct internal form with a notable width and a ceiling structure that's not typical of the everyday passages tourists know. It sits behind the north face like the pyramid quietly built an extra hallway and then dared anyone to prove it. So let me ask you something. Why build a corridor that leads nowhere? Or does it? If this were only for stress relief, why does it look so deliberate? If it was meant to protect something, what exactly was the threat they were engineering around? And if the Great Pyramid still hides corridor-level architecture behind one of its most studied faces, how confident should we be about anything we think we know? Because now, the stakes are higher. If multiple instruments agree that something is there, why does that matter more than ever? Why this time is different? The new standard of proof. Because science stopped trusting single scans. That might sound small, but it's actually the biggest shift in this whole Great Pyramid Anomaly update. For years, pyramid discoveries had a problem. Someone would run one test, get an interesting signal, and the story would explode. Headlines would sprint ahead while the evidence was still tying its shoes. Then a second team would check. The result would look different, and the whole claim would quietly evaporate. Not because people were lying, but because ancient stone is complicated, and one instrument can be fooled by angles, density changes, and even tiny gaps that mean nothing. So the new rule is simple. If you want to rewrite history, you do not get to do it with one magical screenshot. That's why the North Ace corridor feels different. It didn't arrive as a single dramatic announcement. It moved like a case being built in a courtroom. First came detection, where Muon scans flagged a corridor-shaped space behind the north face. Not a vague cavity, but a shape that looked intentional. Then came confirmation, where the same area was examined with other non-destructive methods that see the stone in completely different ways. Then came validation, where those different streams of data were combined and checked for overlap, like laying 3 transparent maps on top of each other and noticing the same hallway keeps appearing in the same place. This is the new standard of proof: multimodal convergence. In normal human words, it means the machines have to agree. And here's the twist most people miss. The real revolution isn't just hidden chambers. The real revolution is archaeology growing a spine and saying, we're not moving the timeline until the instruments line up. That's huge because it slows down the hype, but it strengthens the truth. It's the difference between a rumor and a receipt. Think about what it takes for 3 different methods to point to the same corridor. Muons measure particle counts passing through stone. Electrical resistivity looks at how the stone conducts. Image fusion doesn't invent a corridor. It checks if separate measurements can be aligned into one consistent picture. If those all nod in the same direction, the odds of oops, weird noise drop fast. So when people ask, why should I care about a corridor behind the north face? The answer is because it proves the pyramid can still surprise us under modern rules. Not ancient guessing. It proves we are not just chasing mysteries. We're upgrading how we prove them. Do you trust modern scans more than ancient texts? If a scan and a written account disagree, which one do you believe first? And if you were in charge, would you allow careful physical exploration to verify these spaces? Or would you treat the Great Pyramid like a sealed time capsule that should never be touched? Because here's the thing. Once you accept this new standard, the door opens wider. And the surprises didn't stop inside the Great Pyramid. So what happened when scientists started looking beyond the places everyone stares at? The ground beneath Giza is speaking too. Not everything is hidden inside the pyramid. Because once researchers got comfortable using non-invasive tools on stone, the next question was obvious. What if the unfinished map problem is not just inside Khufu's pyramid, but underneath the entire Giza plateau too? And that's where the Western Cemetery comes in. This is the area beside the Great Pyramid where many high-status people were buried. And on the surface, it can look quiet, almost like the story has already been told. But when teams ran modern surveys there, the ground started answering back. Using ground-penetrating radar, which sends signals into the earth and listens for reflections, researchers picked up an anomaly that did not look like a natural pocket or random disturbance. It had sharp edges and a deliberate bend, an L shape. That shape matters because nature usually does not build clean corners underground. People do. The reports describe it as a shallow structure a few meters below the surface, and it appears to be filled or backfilled, almost like something was made and then intentionally packed in. That already raises a weird little question. If it is nothing, why does it look constructed? And if it is constructed, why hide it so neatly that the surface gives you no clues? Then they layered in electrical resistivity tomography, or ERT, which is basically a way of mapping what is under the ground by checking how easily electricity moves through it. Different materials behave differently. Solid rock, loose sand, open spaces, and built chambers do not share the same electrical fingerprint. And here's where the phrase, possible entrance to a deeper structure, becomes both exciting and easy to misunderstand. It does not mean they found a door with a handle. It means the shallow L-shaped feature may connect to something deeper that reads as a different kind of space in the data. In other words, the scans suggest the shallow anomaly might not be the whole story. It might be a path, a connector, or a marker for something below. Now we have to be honest. This is not the same as opening a tomb and filming the inside. The anomaly is a signal, a strong clue, the kind you take seriously. but it still lives in that zone between probable and proven. That is the balance. We do not need to exaggerate it to feel the tension. The tension is already there. So let me ask you, could there still be undiscovered tombs right beside the Great Pyramid if there is a deeper structure? Why would it be placed in an area with no obvious surface marker? And if modern scans keep finding geometry underground, how much of Giza is still hiding in plain sight? Because if the ground around the Great Pyramid is still holding secrets, the next reveal gets even stranger. And then the smallest pyramid delivered the biggest surprise. So what happened when researchers shifted their attention away from Khufu and toward his neighbors? Menara's secret, a second entrance. And this is where the story gets sneaky, because the biggest shock does not come from the biggest pyramid. It comes from Menor, the smallest of the three main pyramids at Giza. The one most people treat like a side character in a story that belongs to Khufu. Menor is more than 60 meters tall, but the real detail isn't the height. It's the skin. On the eastern side, there's a patch of granite blocks that has bothered researchers for years because the stones are unusually polished, almost like someone cared about that exact spot a little too much. The smooth area is roughly 4 meters high and 6 meters wide. And what makes that weird is this. That kind of smooth, deliberate finish is otherwise mainly seen around the pyramid's known entrance on the north side. So the obvious question becomes uncomfortable in the best way. Why would you polish a section of wall like an invitation if there's supposedly nothing there? This is where modern scanning stops being a vibe and starts being receipts. Researchers used a mix of non-destructive testing tools, the kind designed specifically to avoid drilling, cutting, or damaging anything. Ground-penetrating radar listens for changes behind the stone. Ultrasonic testing sends sound through material to catch hidden gaps. Electrical resistivity tomography looks at how the ground and structure conduct electricity, because empty space behaves differently than solid stone. And then they used image fusion, basically layering the views from each method until the overlap becomes hard to ignore. That overlap is the point. Behind that polished eastern facade, they identified two air-filled voids. Not maybe a crack, not probably erosion. Two distinct anomalies with sizes you can picture. One void sits about 1.4 meters behind the outer facade and measures about 1 meter high by 1 meter wide. The second sits about 1 meter behind the facade and measures about 0 meters by 0 meters. In plain language, these are not microscopic gaps. These are spaces with shape. And when a void has shape, it starts sounding less like random damage and more like architecture. Now, does that prove there's a second entrance? Not yet. And this matters. A hidden cavity is evidence, not a conclusion. It supports the idea that something purposeful may be behind that polished zone. But it does not automatically mean there's a door, a corridor, or a dramatic tunnel waiting to be opened like a movie scene. Still, why would builders hide spaces behind a facade this carefully? Why polish that exact section if it's just decorative? And if these voids are real, what are they protecting? Or what are they hiding? Here's the bigger takeaway. When a pyramid surface starts acting like it has marked locations, that changes how you read the entire structure. You stop seeing it as a sealed triangle of stone, and you start seeing it like a designed machine with signals built into the casing. So let me ask you this. Would you want archaeologists to physically investigate a possible second entrance, if it means touching original stone? Do you think these voids are the start of a passage, or just construction spaces that accidentally look suspicious? And if the builders wanted to hide an entrance, why choose the east side at all? Because if all this is real, why haven't we gone inside, Wayne? These discoveries could rewrite history, because the pyramid may not be just a tomb. And I know that sounds like the kind of sentence that usually comes with spooky music and a wild thumbnail. But listen, this time the weird part is not the claim. It's the paperwork behind it. Think about what we've stacked up so far, piece by piece, like stones going into place. First, the scan pyramid's big void from 2017, a large empty space detected above the Grand Gallery, roughly the size of a big corridor, and long enough that you cannot shrug it off as a tiny pocket or a construction scar. That discovery did not tell us what it was for, but it did one thing that mattered more. It proved the internal map we all grew up assuming was complete wasn't. Then came the North Ace corridor. A corridor-shaped space tucked behind the North Ace, close enough to the surface that it feels almost rude. And what makes it hit harder is not just that it exists, it's what it looks like. A high vaulted ceiling, a width that stands out compared to most internal passages. Dimensions are around 2 meters by 2 meters, starting at about a meter deep and pushing inward. That is not a random crack. That is geometry with intention. Now put those two together and ask yourself something simple. If the Great Pyramid was only a sealed, one-time burial container, why does it have multiple hidden but buildable spaces in strategic places? Why would builders spend effort creating voids and corridors that do not behave like accidental gaps? This is where the history shift happens. And it's not because we found a gold chamber or a secret scroll. It's because the engineering story gets more complicated. When you see a corridor near the entrance zone, when you see a massive void positioned above a major internal feature, you are forced to consider planning, sequencing access systems, maybe even phases of use, where certain areas mattered during construction, or during rituals, or during maintenance, or during something we have not correctly named yet. And before anyone jumps off the deep end, let's keep it clean. None of this proves aliens lost tech or a hidden library. What it does prove is that the internal architecture is richer than the old diagram posters. And that means the function question is back on the table in a serious way. So let me ask you honestly, do you think the Great Pyramid's design looks like a simple one-purpose tomb or like a structure with layers of intent? Do you trust modern scans more than ancient texts that were written long after the pyramid was built? If the builders wanted certain spaces to be unseen, what does that say about who was allowed to know the plan? And if we're still discovering new architecture in the most studied monument on Earth, what else are we missing in plain sight? And that leaves us with one uncomfortable question. If the evidence is this strong, why does the world still hesitate to actually go inside? For thousands of years, the Great Pyramid at Giza gave us silence. Now with scans that agree, it's giving us something unique. Measured spaces like the North Ace corridor and those air-filled anomalies near Manor, showing this story is still unfolding, not myths, not legends, just geometry that refuses to stay buried. So, what do you think these hidden voids were really for should scientists be allowed to explore them physically? Do you think the pyramid's true purpose is still unknown? And which discovery surprised you most? Drop your thoughts, like, subscribe, and tell me what if the next scan changes